Um, Thank you everybody for sticking along for so long. It's already 3:30, and I know that all of us are kind of waiting for getting something out of it on this Sunday afternoon. So thanks a lot, Anindra, for your presentation. What Neetu and me are going to do today is that we are going to try to tell you something about Scala. How many of us have coded on Java or are coding on Java or have used Java a lot? Okay, not a lot of us, but I guess if you were here since morning, then in some of the presentations that you might have heard, you would have heard that some of the people, they were really cursing Java for all the expressiveness and all the amount of lines of code and everything that we have to write in Java. And they are right. They are not really wrong, and that is the reason that there are many languages today, or many dynamic languages today, like Groovy, Ruby, and all those kind of languages which are being proposed as an alternate solution to Java. So what people say is that you do not need to do Java. You do not need to write all that kind of boilerplate code. What you can do is that you can get the same kind of functionality in much less amount of time, with much less code, with much less bugs and all that, using some other language. Now, all that sounds very good, and that is actually to an extent true, because if you think about it, right now, whenever we were developing a lot of web applications, what we were doing is that we were just using Java because we did not have an alternative. So had we, if we were supposed to kind of create a small website, it was still kind of built in Java. If we had to create a huge enterprise level functionality, it had to be created in Java. So there was not a lot of options available. But now, thankfully, with kind of coming of many things like Groovy, Ruby, and kind of a lot of other dynamic languages, we have a lot of options. However, I don't know how many of you are using Ruby. How many of us? Anybody? I know Lalit was supposed to be using it, but he's not here anymore. Yeah. So now one of the problems with Ruby is, and this is something that he mentioned in the morning also, was that it is slow. And what really happens is that, if you look at a site like Twitter, that was based on Ruby. And then later they converted to, kind of using a lot of their functionality using Scala. Now the problem with these dynamic languages is that they are very good when you want to create small functionalities with them, or relatively mid-sized functionalities with them. However, as soon as you want to kind of take them enterprise-wide, that is where they start kind of becoming dicey. You don't agree? And why? Well, of you have heard about it, or kind of. Okay. Right. Okay. So Scala, what it tries to do is that it tries to hit the sweet spot between dynamic languages and our static languages. And what it tries to do is that it tries to give you the scalability required for actually creating a system which can be both, I can create a small system with it, or I could create a huge system with it. So what we're trying to do in this session is that, though we have very less time, and in the morning, like we were told that, okay, you also going to do the second presentation, and now this is 40 odd minutes. I'm sure that we are not going to do a lot of it. So just kind of feel free to ask questions, interject us wherever you feel that there is a need, and then we try to answer your question and take it further. Right? So these between functional programming and object-oriented programming. Anybody heard about functional programming? Wow. That sounds like neat. Okay, what is functional programming?
Functional programming is dividing
More like procedural programming, that you have, kind of you're writing a procedure and doing it that way. Functional programming is a bit different. We'll talk about that. Then we have a small section on introducing Scala, on what Scala is. In the features, we'll be talking about how does it compare to Java and where does it actually hit the sweet spot, and endnotes about learning resources and how you can go ahead and learn more about Scala. So first, let us look at what functional programming is. Okay, now if you read the definition out there, is the code readable? I guess it should be. Guys on the back, if you're not sleeping, just raise your hand and say code is readable. Okay, so it is a concept where you can pass functions as arguments, right? So till now, we always had a scenario where we were passing, primitives as arguments, or we were passing, other objects as arguments. But this functional programming is a concept where you pass functions as arguments, and you can return them from other functions. So if you look at this particular code, can anybody explain me what is this doing?
It's the main method that is called, and that calls once per second. Time flies, and time flies is
right. So this is what is the kind of concept behind functional programming. We'll show you what are the kind of different benefits out of it, because what it really helps you doing is that it really helps you write a lot of code which you can reuse again and again. Because just imagine what I can do with this piece of code. Right now I've written just, kind of time flies. Now instead of saying time flies, I want to pass it another function which does something else. Say for example, it calculates a factorial. Right? Now I could pass that function to this function, and for calculating a factorial, what it will do is that it will keep on calculating factorial every second. Right? So now this particular code block becomes a heavily reusable code block just because of the fact that I can pass functions to it. Right? So that is how the reusability comes, and this is what functional programming is all about. And if you've heard about other languages like Haskell and Erlang and all these languages for use for concurrent programming, these languages are based a lot on functional programming. And till now what was happening was that a lot of these languages were functional programming languages, a lot of the other languages were object-oriented languages, but then this Scala, what they have done is that they have again hit the sweet spot between functional and object-oriented programming, and they have made a language in which you can do both. Right? So this is the idea of Scala. This I guess everybody knows about it, right? Everybody has been using object-oriented programming, and this is what it is. So you can make use of, encapsulation, polymorphism, inheritance, all this kind of stuff. So we already talked about the fact that, this is what Scala is doing. It is giving you a combination of functional programming plus object-oriented programming. And what it really does is that you can do all of these things which are, listed out there for doing anything that you want. So for example, we talk about the concepts of what higher order functions are, what algebraic types and pattern matching is, but subtyping, inheritance, everybody knows inheritance, right? Everybody knows polymorphism. This is something that we have learned in the object world. So functional programming is a new thing for us, and we'll discuss more about that. So, yeah. Before we get there, I and Meetu will be talking about it. And the reason why we wanted to do this was, first it kind of exhausts us less, and it makes it less boring for you. So that is what we thought we'd do. So before we get into the features of Scala, in which we'll be discussing various functional types and how you can pass functions and what are the different things that you can do with it, let us briefly touch upon the history of Scala and what Scala is really all about. Would you like to do that?
So there is a functional programming concept, and there is OOP, and Scala was kind of an experiment which started with Martin Ordesky in EPFL, and he started a project, and the project had a different language name, and they started to look at how exactly you can combine a functional programming language with OOP together. Now what happens most of the time, there are only few examples, like if you make a search, Google search, which are the languages which is both functional programming language and which is both OOP, then you will find they are really few in number, and especially in the case of implementing them, were mostly related to some kind of research done at the university. But Martin Ordesky had a different kind of feeling, like that he looked at the problem domain at the language level. That in most of the softwares which we implement in Java, in .NET, or in different languages, there you always talk about scalability. There are different kind of languages which is suitable for a certain kind of a work. Like even if you look at the software landscape today, then it is something like for the UI you have a different layer altogether. For the interacting with the database, you have a different layer, and so the history of Scala is solving the problem by changing the language. When you talk about software components, they are supposed to be reusable. As you can see that this is possible. You can write scripts in scripts, which is really kind of a small snippet of code which does interesting things, and you can also abstract them in a certain way that will create an application at an enterprise level and can even create a DSL, and that is what the slide shows. That our language is scalable. Scala is scalable because it is suitable for small as well as large applications. Second thing is that a single language for, if you look at the language, for example, in an application, you generally say that if I want to make an application, I will use this language for this kind of implementation, language B for this kind of implementation, because they all have individual strengths. And ultimately you have created an application which is a jungle of different kind of technologies. The problem appears you want to make a very small application, and that is where Scala fits in. You can do simple things by writing a script. Then you have a map. This map is different than Java map. It's the Scala implementation. And here you have created that you have a country and it's a capital. Just look at the syntax. You type this in the interpreter and ultimately on the fly you can say that capital plus is equal to Japan Tokyo, and that inserts everything in the map. So that looks like a functional programming, and then you say capital of France, it will return you Paris. So it is like scaling down. You scaled the language at a low level. But the good thing with Scala is that ultimately it all compiles to a Java class, and that is where it hits a nice sweet spot. So you can call a Java class from your Scala, or you can from Scala you can call Java. So that is how it is really good. In the next version of Java, then that becomes very difficult to incorporate. So people are getting kind of frustrated, and they feel that okay, for this feature maybe I'll have to wait for two more years. But on the other hand, the JVM is handy. JVM is like ultimately running a bytecodes. That is where Java is giving you that kind of opportunity. So if you implement a language which can work upon a JVM and incorporate these kind of features which we are talking about, then you have possibly solved the problem. So what does Scala is the Java of the future, because it has basically everything which Java has now. In one way or the other it is different, but it achieves that. And of course it has closures. It was proposed for Java 7, but it's not coming there. So you can imagine that it's maybe Java 8 or something. And it has traits and pattern matching. Now both of these are completely different new paradigms by combination of FP and OP, functional programming and object-oriented programming. So these are new things which are there, and I don't think that using functional programming languages and proofs concepts. So that is where it scales. It's not like a large kitchen sink kind of a language where you have everything. Does that answer your question? 2 + 2 in Scala. Let's say you have 1 is an integer object, 2 is another integer object, right? And you want to add them. So in Java you would say an integer dot add integer, right? Right? In Scala you can skip the dot part and you can simply write 1 + 2. That is plus, you can read as add, plus is the method name. So that gives you a completely different paradigm. So if you look at this example, then everything here, like when you say 1.hash code, compute the hash code as happens in Java, and when you call 1 + 2, it is exactly 1 dot plus 2, and you can see the result. So everything is an object. In Java, if you're working upon Scala, you can do on the fly without any issues. Okay. Now we were talking about Scala features, how they are implemented, and we will see things in much more detail and some code examples. I'm handing over to Vikas.
Just before we get there, one of the things I just want to tell you is that the creator of Groovy, what he said was that if I had known that there is something like Scala coming out, I would have never created Groovy. So this is a very strong statement if you think about it. Another very strong statement is, and that's very famous now because everybody is kind of pointing to that. Another big statement is that you guys know who created Java?
I know, okay, but I won't.
Gosling.
Right.
Perfect. So somebody asked Gosling that if you were not using Java on the JVM, what else would you use? And he said that my first choice is going to be Scala. So there is a lot of weight behind Scala right now that this is going to be the language of the future. You're going to see kind of many people migrate from other dynamic languages, I don't know which ones, to Scala. Many people are going to migrate from Java to Scala because of the kind of preciseness, because of the functionality that it provides. And some of that would become evident once we start looking at some of the features here. Again, we were kind of reminded of the time limit that we have. So I'm just going to kind of run through this. This is what Scala adds into its kind of kitty, and the other things on the right hand side are the ones that it removes from Java. So it removes kind of things like enums and kind of static members and primitives. So there are no primitives, as Mithu talked about, that there are only objects that we are talking about, and there are just functions. Okay, quick comparison. People who know how Java works, they would be able to kind of gauge the comparison between Scala and Java. In Java, that is how you define a method and a variable, and this is how you do it in Scala. So I guess these slides are going to be available anyway, so you can browse through them. We just touch upon the major things. So a class and an object in Scala looks like this, and Java class with statics looks like that. Now, what is a singleton? Anybody knows about the singleton? Single instance of class, right?
Class that have only methods, not attributes.
We had to define singleton by a singleton pattern. It was a design pattern, and as Lalit was talking in the morning, that it is an atom bomb. So design patterns and other patterns are there. But in Scala, they take away those atom bombs away from you, and they kind of define certain things called objects. Now, object is nothing but it exists only as a single instance. So you can't do anything else from an object. You can instantiate or you can create multiple instances of a class, like the one on top. But then for an object, you just have one instance, so you don't have a singleton kind of pattern to take care of that. Then again, like in between Java and Scala, there are interfaces in Java, and there are it's more than just a change in terminology, because interfaces in Java, they do not have any functionality, right? We just have kind of declarations out there and definitions or the implementations we provide in the classes. And the corresponding VM, so you can see the conciseness of Scala in terms of the fact that the number of lines that Java produces as compared to Scala, those are much more, as a result of which your code is going to be much smaller in Scala. Okay, this is the way you define constructors. So I guess everybody who's using objects. So val is kind of more like, so there are two things in Scala. Val is more like a final variable. So you define the value and you cannot change it anymore. It is more immutable, right? And variable, you can also write val, V-A-R. Val is when it becomes immutable, when it is kind of not immutable, and you can change that. So that is how you define the two different kind of variables and stuff. So let us forget about the Java function on the top. But if you look at the Scala program down here, I don't know if it is visible at the back. In any case, people at the back are not listening. So if you just look at the code segment out here, can anybody tell me what it is it really doing over here? Like starting from object, result over range. Over range, and in that we actually define a method called total result over range. That method takes one argument which is an int, right, and it takes another argument which is actually a code block, right. Now, and this entire total result over range method that actually returns an integer. We cover that later. We just browser a bit. Okay, then what happens is that whenever we are creating any code blocks, those code blocks have actually variables which are bound. So for example, when I create a code block, I started with a kind of curly brace, and I say that okay, I is equal to blah blah something, and I or int j is equal to something. Now in closures, what I can also do is that I can define a different variable, say b, which is not kind of defined anywhere in my code block. And what it tries to do is that once I define the closure, then from the environment in which the closure is defined, it tries to extract the value of the variable from there. So for example, if you look at this code block over here, now forget about everything else. Now just look at the closure code of maybe, just look at the val added part, right? In the val added, what we are doing is that we are defining the value variable as an integer, but then we have no definition for result. in that particular code block. Now what this closure would do is that it will try to get the value of result from the environment in which it is defined. So for example, in that case, it will pick up the value of result as result equal to 0 and then do the computation whenever you want to do that. Right? Likewise, if you look at val mult it submit towards the bottom, there again we are not kind of defining the result anywhere as a variable, or we are not binding it there. What it tries to do is that it tries to bind it from the place where the closure is defined. So it will pick up the value of result from the environment, and from there it will start using it. That is in a nutshell what closure is about. But of course, you can get more details on that. We just discussed two more topics: traits and pattern matching.
Like again, that you are looking at the function which is defined as right arrow is again a class. It's a first order function which accepts two variables if it is a first order function, S and T. So that is what you have seen. Now we can use it in a different way. We'll use it in pattern matching, but first I'll discuss traits. This is a fundamental way of code we use in Scala. It is somewhat similar to interfaces in Java, except you can have methods which are concrete in nature, right? And you can mix the composition, extend a class which can actually implementing the trait. So you can mix the composition and have those functionalities defined in a trait. So it sits somewhere between an interface and a concrete class. Right? And what it does achieve is that it makes your interface much more richer in a certain way if you want to call it an interface. So we will see one small example. So for example, you have a trait philosophical, and it has a method called philosophize, and it has a simple print there, and you have a class which is extending a philosophical. Now philosophical is a trait, and a class frog has extended it, and it has overridden a def toString green. Now if you look at the calls which are made just below that, is that first you do a toString on the latest frog, which is kind of a frog, and it prints green. But if you see that if you call the philosophize method, then it will call obviously the implementation. But what is happening here is that it is giving you some kind of multiple inheritance, and it can get a lot of methods which are implemented. So that is the use of traits. Pattern matching is somewhat similar to switch statement, except that it is something like that, and it's a double negation, and it X itself. Or when you're adding 0 to the expression, it should be the expression itself. Or if you're multiplying with 1, it should be the expression itself. So that is one example of pattern matching. And of course, there are 3 or 4 different kind of pattern matching which you can do. But this is one example which I'm showing. Possibly I can run that on Eclipse and probably use that. I've opened the binary operator. What you only have to do is that you have to give a case keyword. It does 2 things. The first thing it does is that it reduces the noise. It gives a factory method where you don't have to do a new to create the object. So the expression becomes simple. The second thing which it does is that it creates instance variables of fly which you use to compare.
Just announce the schedule.
So everything in the variable X, as you can see, this is out. So that is one other example of pattern matching, and it's all like you have changed the Scala language as such. In that way it is malleable, and you are modifying the language itself to suit your application. So that is one example. Okay, so we get into the end notes. I mean, of course, the community is active. A lot of things are happening about what happens is that whenever you look at any kind of language or technology, you see that is the community active. If you are starting and work in that technology, where can you get the help? So you will see that there are plenty of people who are using it. So, industrial adoption has started. We already mentioned Twitter, and of course there are so many other examples. And you have got tool supports, like you have a Scala compiler, which is somewhat similar to Java C. Then you have FSC, that you can schedule things there. And you have a shell, which is Scala. Then of course, which is similar to Ruby on Rails, you have a Lift framework. You can read that as a next step if you want. And you have testing frameworks, different kind. Of course, it takes some kind of help like what has happened in Ruby or other dynamic languages. So it is built upon similar lines. And you have IDE plugins, which you have already seen for Eclipse, and it exists for others as well. For Eclipse, NetBeans, IntelliJ. And one of the open source projects, one is Lift, and the other is like Wicket. Wicket is, how many of you know about Wicket? Okay, only one person. Then Logo is, I mean, there's so many examples and communities are there. Archita.com, Bill Winners, first steps will tell you how to install and how to write small code snippets to make you get started in Scala. Then after that you can go deeper and read by who have created the language themselves. And that's it.